Hey folks, it's that time again.
Xing the gap.
I've been excited about this episode for months because I'm finally speaking to one of my favorite writers, Adam Gopnik. His recent book, A Thousand Small Sanities, The Moral Adventures of Liberalism, is written as a letter to his daughter, Olivia, who joins us for this intergenerational conversation. Adam's been a staff writer for The New Yorker for 35 years and has won multiple national magazine awards for his essays and criticism. Olivia is studying history at Harvard and has often figured prominently in her father's writing, from bumping into Mr. Ravioli all the way to today. We talk about the shock of Trump's election, growing up in Montreal, New York, and Paris, the relevance of liberalism, privilege versus good fortune, sharing your good fortune, macro events, micro consequences, identity politics on college campuses, rock and roll in the 60s, empathy in theater, Jewish identity, the institution of baseball, and a game show. Name any movie starring Kevin Costner.
No clue.
Adam, come on in.
Any good movie?
Well, that's tricky, though.
The one I would throw in, which is a good movie, is The Big Chill, where he plays a dead guy.
Indeed. Is it good because he's dead? Is that why?
No, he's not okay. He's okay, Kevin Costner.
He's Kevin Costner, and I'm Rick Miller, and this is
Xing the gap.
Welcome, Adam Gopnik and Olivia Gopnik-Parker.
Great to be here with you, Rick.
Thanks for having us, Rick.
Yeah. So, Adam, I've been a fan from a distance for a long time. Also a former Montrealer, or at least I know you spent some time there. And so when I asked...
You spent some time. Grew up
You
there.
spent a lot of time, I know. So I asked our mutual friend, Michael Levine, for guest suggestions when I was starting this intergenerational podcast. And you were actually first on his list. And the hook was that your recent book at the time, A Thousand Small Sanities, took the form of a conversation with your daughter, Olivia. And I just done something similar on stage with Boom YZ, which is part 3 of my Boom trilogy of solo stage shows with my daughter, Vivian. So, Olivia, apparently these conversations occurred after Trump was elected in 2016, and it seemed authoritarianism was rearing its ugly head again. So that's all prologue. What I'd love it is if each of you could give me the short story version of who you are, what you do, and how you arrived at that fateful conversation in 2016. So, Adam, I'll start with you, and then we'll pass it over to Olivia, okay?
Olivia will be much more interesting.
So maybe, you know what? I'll take that as a cue. I'm going to go to Olivia first.
Olivia first.
Well, prior to that, all of the interesting things in my life have happened perhaps post-Trump's election, to be honest. But prior to that, I was a high school student, a daughter of Adam Gopnik. And I think I was much less concerned with the state of the world than I then became sort of post-Trump's election. And I think we spoke a lot, I think, in the months that followed Trump's election of this idea of sort of being in bubbles or being sort of, politically siloed. And I think growing up in New York City, everyone I knew was very liberal. And I think Trump's election sort of brought home to a lot of people who had grown up in New York the sense that there was this sort of looming uglier face of American politics that I think we felt like was always kept at an arm's length. And I think it felt much more pressing in those months. And I went to therapy after Trump was elected. I became very, very frightened, perhaps irrationally, but I became very frightened of nuclear war.
Not irrationally. I think it's...
Yeah, I think it opened up a whole new range of sort of fears and feelings for me that I hadn't had before. And I think in many good ways, it made me much more politically active. And now I'm at Harvard. I study history. And I think a lot of people, when I talk to other students here, feel like that was really a turning point for them in terms of figuring out what they wanted to do with their lives and realizing that sort of doing something more political was something that they were attracted to. So that's sort of how I got to that conversation. And I think, it ended up being a really important one for me.
Cool. Thank you, Olivia. And we'll pick up actually the content of the book and that conversation in a bit. But Adam, I'll pass it over to you. I know quite a bit about your story, but in case my audience does not know, what's the elevator pitch version of Adam Gopnik?
It's like the dating game. Olivia's too young to remember the dating game. But basically, my story sort of is fairly simple. I was born in Philadelphia because my parents were at Penn. Then they both got academic posts at McGill in Montreal. And that's where I really grew up and where I met Olivia's mom. And we went to McGill together, Martha Parker. And then we emigrated like generations of starry-eyed Canadian kids, got in a bus at the Montreal depot and went to New York City. where we started our new life. I wrote a whole book about that called At the Stranger's Gate. Then I started writing for the New Yorker magazine, where I've been ever since in 1986. And I've been depending on how you like to look at it, a steady contributor or an unwilling sharecropper of that magazine ever since, being forced to sell all my goods to the plantation store. In 1994, Olivia's brother, Luke Auden, was born, and we decided to throw our cap over the wall and move to Paris. And for the next almost 6 years, we were in Paris, where Olivia Esme Claire Gopnik-Parker was born, providing both one of the greatest joys of my life and the culminating chapter of my book about our life in Paris, Paris the Moon, where Olivia is born. And that's the climax. It's like a Baroque painting where the cherubs are all throwing flowers at this amazing baby. Then we moved back to New York in 2000, and I began writing about New York life, including perhaps the single most anthologized and well-known piece I ever wrote, which is called Bumping into Charlie Ravioli, which was an account of Olivia's imaginary friend when she was 3 years old, entirely an Olivia invention, for which I took the credit and got the royalties, and then turned those pieces about New York life into another book called Through the Children's Gate, in which Olivia is very much the leading character. And since then, since 2005, when that book came out, I've continued writing for the New Yorker, and my work has taken an ever more, I don't like to say political, but certainly public-minded bent. Whereas when I was in Paris, I wrote chiefly about the comedy of family life, and similarly in New York. In recent years, I've written a lot about gun control in America. I've written a lot about the threat to liberal institutions, and all of that culminated in my book, A Thousand Small Sanities, the Moral Adventure of Liberalism, which was keyed off exactly, now to come full circle to Olivia's description, by a conversation Olivia I had on the night when Trump was elected, and we went out for a long walk to deal with the shock of it. Olivia, I should add immediately, was the one person in my circle. Olivia talked of bubbles a moment ago, and if we were in one, certainly, but Olivia punctured the bubble to the point that she was telling me insistently in the months before Trump was elected, Hillary Clinton is extremely unpopular, and that won't be fixed. And I don't deny it, didn't deny it, but didn't want to hear it entirely. In any case, I realized that my own ability, my own rhetorical ability to persuade Olivia of the ongoing relevance of the liberal humanist values with which I'd been raised and in which I deeply believed was limited. And that compelled me to write the book that became A Thousand Small Sanities.
A Thousand Small Sanities. The title of Adam Gopnik's book refers to the belief that when big problems get solved in the world, it's rarely big utopian ideas that solve them. Rather, it's the intercession of a thousand small sanities, the incremental, imperfect steps of liberalism. Liberalism is only a couple of hundred years old. Humans have lived with tyranny much longer than with liberty. What is liberalism? Well, Gopnik tells a story in which he and his daughter Olivia pass a house with a sign in front that said, "In this house we believe that Black lives matter, women's rights are human rights, no human is illegal, science is real, love is love, kindness is everything." And Olivia said, "Dad, that's your entire book." There's a section in the book which quotes you, Olivia, as saying, or paraphrasing, "Of course you're a liberal, Dad, because you've benefited from the way that the system is rigged." And that thought is very much in line with how my own kids speak to me sometimes. And I'm wondering how your thinking around that, Olivia, might have changed or not changed since your dad made the case for liberalism, which is the whole thesis of the book.
It's a tough question because I do think that there are so many things that go into someone having what we, call on college campuses privilege. And it's definitely something that one always must remain conscious of. And I'm interested to sort of hear what my dad might say about Dad, maybe take this one.
Well, I think Olivia is typically being very delicate in her response, because she doesn't want to accuse her father of a life of blind privilege. In Thousand Small Sanities, as you know, Rick, I take on this question as directly as I can. And one of the things that I think is true is that no one feels that theirs was a life of privilege. We feel that ours were lives of purpose. I've been writing, as Olivia can tell you, 7 days a week, 6 hours a day for 40 years. And that doesn't feel particularly privileged. That feels terribly purposeful. My father and mother, in turn, were the offspring of semi-literate immigrants who literally put themselves through college, to use literally as Olivia's generation uses it, to mean not literally, but effectively. Privilege is a cul-de-sac, as we say in Montreal. It's a dead end. What I do think is a useful way to talk about these things is in terms of good fortune. In any society, no matter how we imagine it, the most egalitarian society we can imagine will have elements of good fortune. Some people will be taller and better looking than other people. Some of us will be short and still good looking. But good fortune is something that we can recognize. God knows I've had a lot of it, above all in having a daughter like Olivia. But we can either choose to hoard our good fortune or share our good fortune. That's a legitimate ethical question. Telling somebody, "Oh, check your privilege," is annoying and patronizing and optically incorrect. But saying to someone, you should share your good fortune, not hoard your good fortune. You should push your good fortune into forms and currents that enable other people to benefit from it. Everything from the philanthropy and charity work you do to, more importantly, to trying to take a better role on as a citizen. And I think it's one of the things that that Olivia, I think, not speaking for her, but having observed her, certainly took from these years of turbulence, that she had an obligation not just to study and to develop her own self, but to lead and to share her good fortune with other people.
I think turbulence is a good word, and I don't know if you use it in the book, but it certainly seems that liberalism is fraught with turbulence and this kind of fragility of things that are always on the verge of crumbling. So I'm wondering how both of you might feel, knowing that the conversations in the book took place, pre-2019, pre-COVID, pre-Putin invasion, pre this NATO resurgence, a kind of silver lining of unity around liberalism, it seems, at least now. What are both of your perspectives on the state of the world right now versus the way it might have been a few years ago? Olivia, maybe I'll throw that to you.
Totally. I think one of the things that's super interesting when we think about sort of the differences between two really catastrophic events, in my opinion, one being Trump's election and the other being the pandemic, is that there is this feeling, and I think it plays into this idea that we have of privilege, right? Where I was sort of shielded in many ways through good fortune from the consequences of Trump's election. And I think that the interesting thing about sort of a macro event like that is that it often doesn't have personal consequences. But obviously in 2020, we learned that a macro event can also have very, very personal consequences. And I think that that's a super rare thing, right? Where it felt like the pandemic was something that not only was this sort of macro event that everyone was dealing with, but also had day-to-day massive changes to my life. I was, kicked off of campus. I, lived with my parents and I didn't go outside for 3 months. And I think that for me, that's the biggest difference, is that the pandemic felt like something that was sort of this macro event that had incredibly micro consequences, whereas Trump's election felt like this macro thing that didn't, at least in my experience, have specific micro consequences. But Dad, I don't know if you have any other sort of thoughts.
That's really well said, Lily. The one thing I'd add to that is that when we were going through the first part of the pandemic, we were lucky enough to have Olivia at home with us, and Olivia's mom, Martha, and I spent the entire pandemic in New York City. We want to have T-shirts made up that said, "We never left." We had a strong sense of commonality, and in lots of ways, and I think this was largely true, the liberal values, and particularly liberal institutions, were reinforced. Did actually, given the scale of the challenge, did actually pretty well in the pandemic. We were terrified when the pandemic began in New York, and it was clear that New York was going to be the epicenter of the first wave, which it was, that the city's institutions, everything from hospitals to grocery stores, wouldn't be strong enough to handle it. And they turned out to be more than strong enough to handle them all. What I don't think was predictable was that the pandemic itself would become as politically polarized as it eventually did. That was, in some respects, a surprise and a crushing disappointment. But I do think that liberal institutions handled the pandemic reasonably well, with the possible exception of universities, which got into panic mode early and stayed in it probably far too long.
Identity politics. You've probably heard the term used by the right to bash on the left and to expose everything they hate about liberalism. And nowhere has that battle been more visible than on university campuses, where young people are busily figuring out who they are and how they fit into the world. Gen Z kids have very fluid notions of identity and gender, and I think that this fluidity is part of what makes the right so afraid. Nothing is stable anymore, including our own sense of self. They fear that liberalism gone wild is tearing apart communities, families, and traditions that have given their lives structure and meaning. So when you hear of cancel culture, moral panic, and wokeness, where better to point the finger than that most liberal of institutions, the university? Are you Gen Z? You're born like, do you identify as?
I'm like on the cusp.
Gen Z. Sorry,
yeah,
you live in the States.
Yeah.
You're at Harvard right now, right? A big classic institution. And I'm sure identity politics gets talked about a lot. What do you think of it?
Doing the work for understanding any sort of marginalized identity is discussing it or working through it in an academic context. And I think something that I've been upset about seeing on college campuses is the feeling that you can only talk about something, write about something, or work on something that is directly akin to who you are. And I think when things like that stop people who don't have those identities from doing the work of understanding the position of people who do have, different racial identities or different sexual identities, what you're doing essentially is stopping people from having, being able to work through their own internalized racism or internalized homophobia or whatever it is. That I find really troubling.
I always find bizarre about that is that so many of the ideas that contribute to the discussion of marginalized identities come from people like Foucault and Karl Marx and so on, who had nothing in common with those identities. It sort of seems self-evident that we take ideas from all kinds of places and all kinds of people. And as you know, I think that there's a risk of something even more pernicious in that kind of centering identity, right? You can only talk about lesbian experience if you're a lesbian and so on.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm queer. And I have a girlfriend, and I was talking with my girlfriend to a bunch of people. And I think that one thing that is very funny is that because I'm queer, I'm white, as you can see, but as also it is just true. I have been in situations where I feel as if because I have this sort of marginalized identity, I'm included in a group of marginalized other identities. It's not true. I cannot speak to any other experiences. My experience of being queer has been like nothing but good. And I think that a lot of other people's is not that way. But I do think it gives me some sort of, strange power because there's so much, I think, discussion about the way that sometimes older liberal people speak about identity politics and are like, oh, identity politics, these kids are so crazy. I think that there is a lot of, anger amongst young people about that sort of narrative. But I don't think it's wrong. There are aspects of it that have definitely gone too far. And I think that one thing that the right says that I disagree with is this idea that the left is eating itself by, creating all these groups and systematically throwing out, you can't win anything by coalition creating in a way that you say like, well, you're not allowed to speak on this or you're not allowed to speak on this. And they're making the coalition smaller and smaller. I think that is true to a certain extent, but I don't think the right's answer to that is that they want to sort of help these identities in any ways. I think that they want to say that, and then they don't have any sort of, plan for how they would bring these identities in any sort of cohesive way. Yeah, I don't know. Dad, do you have any thoughts on? I think
you're being totally eloquent.
Agreed.
And it's fascinating to me, Olivia, because I've never heard you reference yourself as queer before. And your mom and I always reference you as gay, or have since you've come out. That is when we don't reference you as cute.
Yes.
Which, of course, as I speak, I've got about 6 pictures of Olivia at the ages of from 6 months to 5 on my desk, as she knows. One of the things that I always think about is when I feel at odds with or not understanding of Olivia's generation, if I may use that expression, on things, for instance, let's be blunt, like trans issues. Not that I'm in any sense, in any imaginable sense, transphobic, but it always seems to me that it's, given how tiny a minority we're talking about, it seems to me that making that central to everything else that's going on in our social life is odd. But then I remember, I'm just old enough to remember the late 60s. I was just a young adolescent. I was 12 or 13 living in Montreal. but I was a precocious kind of kid. And I remember seeing a lot of that experience through my father's prism and my older sister's, who was crazy and an anti-Vietnam activist in Montreal. And one of the things that was central to it is that older people in the left, I don't know if the name Irving Howe means anything to you, he's famous left socialist, but he was as lefty and as piously lefty as a human being could be, but he could not for the life of him understand Woodstock. He couldn't for the life of him understand the alliance that had been made between rock and roll music, which he regarded as very low rent, and progressive politics, which he regarded as pious as anything could be. He was just totally thrown by it. And I recognize that that's very often what happens when cultural politics and governmental politics get aligned, is an older generation just can't understand it. So I recognize that my inability to understand exactly why trans politics are so important generationally is a failing of my own. It just is a particular kind of generational blindness that we all get. And I think that the cultural politics of Olivia's generation, to the degree that I understand them, are very much turned on those questions of sexual identity, not because they are uniquely obsessed with sexual identity, but because in a certain sense, that's their rock and roll.
Rock and roll. My show Boom began as an exploration of rock and roll and what made it so creatively explosive in the late 60s. It's a story that weaves in culture, technology, politics, and demographics, as a generation of young baby boomers were coming of age and not liking the system they were coming into. The romantic idealism of the early 60s soon gave way to youthful rebellion, as the technology that once spread the Monster Mash and the mashed potato was now spreading the Cuban Missile Crisis, the assassination of John F. Kennedy, and the Vietnam War. And when culture becomes political, as with rock and roll in the 60s, as with sexual identity today, things can get pretty, well, explosive.
The whole purpose, the whole raison d'etre, if I may say, for theater is to have successive acts of empathy. That's why we take part in the theater. That's why we go to the theater. So to find out what it might feel like to be a Venetian Jew or a Scottish king or a Danish prince. And the idea that you need to be a Danish prince or a Scottish king or a Venetian Jew in order to inhabit that role isn't just limiting. It's exactly the opposite of everything the theater is about.
However, I understand that I'm not about to go play Othello at this stage, when I would literally be taking work away from someone who comes at it more authentically.
Yes,
so
but the greatest one-man show I ever saw was by the great African-American Shakespearean actor, John Douglas Thompson, who did a one-man show in which he played without a costume change, with just turning his head, Louis Armstrong and Louis Armstrong's manager, Jewish manager, Joe Glazer. And it was a miracle in the theater. And it was a miracle exactly because Thompson inhabited both parts with equal credibility and empathy.
I think it's definitely a multi-pronged question, right? When we talk about like who's allowed to inhabit other identities. I think in an academic context or in sort of other more perhaps artistic contexts, when the work is done from the perspective of trying to understand that group, more so than trying to speak for. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Then for me, that feels like, something that should be allowed, but obviously we are all white. So I you know what I mean? I would,
it interests me that you say we're all white, right? Because, one response to that is, well, on you and I, we're not white, we're Jewish, right? And I understand that ours have not been lives marked by endless persecution, no yellow stars on our chest. And yet the reality is that we are Jewish. And that's a big part. I mean, it's the dominant part to the degree that I have an identity. It's as a Jewish intellectual. It's a very specific kind of New York Jewish intellectual from Montreal. And that's a very specific kind of thing to be, and to homogenize that into white wildly misunderstands the nature of what I inherited and I think passed on to you.
I think the Jewish question is an interesting one, especially at a place like Harvard, and also I grew up in the Upper East Side of New York City, where Jewish identity was commonplace. And so it's funny to sort of, I think that is often whitewashed literally into sort of being one identity. But there is a lot of pervasive anti-Semitism even on campus here. whether, there are lots of places on this campus that didn't, let Jews in up until 40 years ago, or even less, 2 decades ago. So it's interesting to sort of think about the way that has become sort of lumped into this larger category of whiteness, when it has such a history of intense anti-Semitism, and even persists to this day, in terms of the way that Jewish people are discussed.
I have one other topic that I have to bring up, Adam, specifically because you've written about baseball. And like me, you are an avid Montreal Expos fan.
Yes.
And like me, when the Expos died and moved on, your love of baseball died a little bit too. You've written about failure and imperfection and impermanence with regards to liberalism. And I'm wondering, is that partly what draws you to baseball as well? Because those are concepts that apply more to baseball than to almost any other sport.
I talk in the book a lot about liberal institutions. Well, baseball was a great liberal institution. It was a way for people like my grandfather, my father, to become, in those days, Americanized or Canadianized. The other great attachment of my life was to the Montreal Canadiens. And the Montreal Canadiens are a great liberal institution within the province of Quebec, the country of Quebec, because exactly because they are the one thing everyone can agree on. They're both a Francophone institution and an Anglophone institution, and have been since their beginning. And being a Habs fan in Montreal was to be a citizen of Quebec. And the way in which those non-governmental, those not officially political institutions serve the role of creating liberal citizenship is one I find hugely moving.
Olivia, sports fan?
I'm not a sports fan. I faked it because I have an older brother for a while. I do not follow any sports teams anymore. I definitely think that one of the things, people talk about the secularization of society. I think sports teams offer that same sort of, religious fervor that perhaps a lot of us are lacking in our secular society. But no, I'm not a sports fan. I do know, however, that the Leafs just signed a Harvard Crimson hockey player. So
wow, that's a cool connection. And while we're on the topic of sports, are you ready to play trivia game show?
Yeah, absolutely.
So Olivia, we're going to start with you.
Great.
All right. First question is, name any Montreal Expos player.
I got nothing.
Name any baseball player alive today.
Derek Jeter.
Well, not playing anymore, but there you go. I think a classic New Yorker. Okay, good. I'll give you a point there. This is very specific to this particular pairing here. I'm going to say the last name of a famous liberal thinker, and you need to see if you know the first names of these people. Okay?
Yes.
Montaigne.
Michelle.
Correct. Hume.
I don't have her dad.
Dad.
Oh, David.
Yep. Okay. Smith. Wealth of Nations.
Well, Adam, sorry.
Yeah, good. Okay. Locke.
John.
Milton.
Also John?
Also John, correct. Mill.
John as well. John.
Yeah, there you go. What is a banana bike?
Is it like a bike for a child?
Not quite close enough. Adam, do you know how to answer this?
I honestly don't know, except was it a bike like the one I had?
It had a long seat like a banana
seat. Yeah, I had that.
What is a TV dinner, Olivia?
Oh, I know what this is. It's like a dinner that is frozen and is advertised on TV.
or it comes in a box and you watch TV.
Yeah, you watch TV during.
I knew you knew that. I'm going to give that to you. Okay. Big Brother has been around for like 23 seasons on TV. What dystopian novel inspired the title, Big Brother?
1984.
Yeah. Okay. Name the famous character. Yeah, baby.
Don't know. Dad.
I think Austin Powers, right?
Yeah, Austin Powers. Okay.
I'm from Mike Myers, who's a fellow Canadian. Right?
That's right. Okay. Name any movie starring Kevin Costner.
No clue.
Adam, come on in.
Any good movie?
Well, that's tricky, though.
The one I would throw in, which is a good movie, is The Big Chill, where he plays a dead guy.
Indeed. Is it good because he's dead? Is that why?
No, he's not okay. He's okay, Kevin Costner. He's great in Bull Durham. He's fantastic in Bull Durham.
Absolutely. Name a Led Zeppelin song.
Stairway to Heaven.
Yeah, okay. Name a Madonna song. Any Madonna song?
Material Girl.
Yeah, okay, good. Name the Flintstones.
Don't know. Oh my God, I do know actually. His name is Fred, and is her name Pebbles?
No, that's his daughter.
Don't know then.
Adam?
Fred and Wilma and Pebbles.
There you go.
And the Rubbles are Barney and Betty and Boom Boom and Bam Bam.
Bam. Boom, boom. Bonus question. What famous TV show was The Flintstones based on? Starring Jackie Gleason.
Olivia.
Norton. Alice.
Oh, was it the Jetsons?
Oh, no. The Jetsons came after The Flintstones. Okay, Adam, you know this.
Olivia knows this because we used to watch the New Year's marathon on
to the moon.
The Honeymooners.
The Honeymooners.
Okay, Adam, I'm going to move over to you. Well done, Olivia. Which cartoon kid, this is from comic strips, had an imaginary stuffed tiger named after a philosopher?
Oh, that's I feel just like Olivia. I know that. That's I see the drawings in my head. I can't think of the
Calvin
and Hobbes.
Okay, I'll give you that one. I gave you a hint there. Colleen Ballinger is famous on YouTube for playing which character? With really bad lipstick.
No idea. Lily?
Nothing. Olivia?
It's Miranda Sings.
Yes. Okay, good. Adam, do you know how to dab?
I can dabble, and I dabble in many fields. I don't know how to do. What is
Olivia?
Dab, Lily?
Olivia, show me a dab.
Like
Dance
that.
move. There you go. Which actor is set to play the lead in the upcoming Weird, the Al Yankovic story?
Oh, I don't know. I love Al Yankovic. He was
I also love Al Yankovic.
Okay. Do you know the answer to this, Olivia?
Oh.
Okay. I'll give you a hint, Adam. He plays Harry Potter.
Oh, Daniel Radcliffe then.
There you go. He's going to play Weird Al.
He's going to play Al Yankovic?
Go figure. Billie Eilish's producer is also her
brother.
Correct. Very good.
Oh,
Okay. Riverdale is a spicy update of which famous comic book?
That I know. Archie and Jughead and whatever. Archie and Veronica.
Okay. Which 17-year-old Pakistani girl was the youngest ever winner of the Nobel Peace Prize?
Oh,
Malala?
Yep, I'll give you that one. Malala Yousafzai.
I was going to say Greta Thunberg, but then I realized she's Pakistani.
Okay. Some texting abbreviations quickly. Adam, LMAO.
LMAO. I wrote a whole song about texting abbreviations.
Yep, but you can't seem to come up with this one, can you?
LMAO. I know. What's that?
Okay,
Lily?
Olivia?
It's laughing my ass off.
Oh,
IMHO.
in my honest opinion.
Well, humble opinion is the one that I hate. His honest opinion is probably, I'll give you that one too. Right. Okay, so this is going to be easy for you. SMH.
Weirdly, I don't know that one. I could do GTG, BRB, but
I'm giving you a very easy visual cue here.
Shaking my head.
I was going to give it to Olivia. Okay, Adam, when something is lit, is that good or bad?
That's good.
Okay, good. Can you name a song by Rihanna?
I saw Rihanna in the movie Battleship.
That doesn't answer my question.
No.
Okay, Olivia, song by Rihanna?
Umbrella.
Yeah. Okay, Adam, name a Spice Girl.
Oh, Baby Spice was my favorite.
Good. Okay.
Baby Spice.
Here, name this tune.
The saddest thing was Posh Spice, who is not posh. Guess what this?
Victoria Spice. Okay. Gonna take my horse to the old town road. I'm gonna ride till I can't no more. Who sings that?
Ed Sheeran.
No. Olivia?
It's Lil Nas.
Lil Nas X. Okay, here's another one. It's like strawberries on a summer evening. Olivia?
Ed Sheeran. It all sounds like Ed
Sheeran. Who is it?
Harry Styles.
Harry Styles, One Direction singer. Okay. Name one of the game. This is open for both of you. Name a Game of Thrones family.
Oh my God. Us, the Gopniks.
The Gopniks. No, the Targaryens. I'll give you that one. Who lives in a pineapple under the sea?
Squidward.
SpongeBob.
SpongeBob.
But Squidward was his partner, right?
Yeah, that's right. Right. And finally, in the musical Hamilton, which I assume you both saw. You saw Hamilton? Great. What famous U.S. political figure does Hamilton have 2 rap battles with?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. Yep, Olivia got it. You know what? I'm going to give you both points on that because you were amazing. I really appreciate you being game to play this stupid,
we love it.
Stupid thing. So
this was awesome. Thank you so much, Rick.
Do you get to do this a lot? Do you ever do interviews together?
No, this is the first one we've ever done.
Oh, that's great.
No, we love it. I loved it.
And as you say in your book, it was a walk worth taking and a talk worth having. This was very much worth the 3-month wait that we took to get this going. So I, again, really appreciate your time. Thanks to you both.
Love doing it.
Rick, thank you so much.
And thank you so much, my friends, for continuing to listen to and support this podcast as we start to wind up our first season. Thanks, of course, to my guests, Adam Gopnik and Olivia Gopnik-Parker. I really encourage you to read A Thousand Small Sanities, especially these days when we realize how fragile liberalism truly is and how, if we value it, we need to fight for it. You can find out more about this and Adam's other writing at adamgopnik.com. My name is Rick Miller, and I wrote, recorded, and edited this episode with multimedia by my team at Cadoons. For more about the Boom Trilogy and our many other projects, visit cadoons.com or boomtheshow.com. Thanks also, as always, to my partners on this podcast, Leap, an online community where life experience meets innovation, created by CABI, the Center for Aging and Brain Health Innovation. For more info or to become a Leap member, visit cabi.com/leap. If you're on a podcast player, please follow us, write a review, tell someone about this or other episodes you liked. You can also send me any questions, comments, or feedback, Rick Miller Actor on Twitter or Instagram, or email rick@rickmiller.ca. And hey, in a polarized world, you have a choice. Build a wall or build a bridge. Build bridges, not walls.
Xing the gap.